Welcome to Afrikindness podcast. Yes, a podcast dedicated to showcasing the richness and diversity of African culture. Join us as we explore the past, present, and future of the African continent and challenge common myths and stereotypes. Whether you're a non-African interested in learning more about the continent or an African seeking to connect with your roots, this podcast is for you. Yes, we aim to educate, entertain, and encourage through natural, authentic, and conversational dialogue. From solo commentaries to panel discussions, we'll share our experiences, stories, and expert views using metaphors, analogies, humor to help you discover the beauty and pride of Africa. Yes!
Welcome back to another riveting episode of Afrikindness podcast, your gateway to unraveling the mystic of Africa. The podcast where we venture into the art of Africa to uncover the complexities hidden behind the curtains of myths and misconceptions. I'm your host, Bunmi Owolabi, and today we are embarking on another captivating journey into the heart of the African reality, debunking myths and misconceptions. But we would be focusing on African reality. How have long-standing myths and misconceptions about Africa influenced its portrayal in the media? And what impact has this had on the world's perception of the Africa's diverse realities? The food for thought. How does the concept of the danger of a single story apply to Africa's portrayal in media and popular culture, and what are the consequences of such narratives? Danger of a single story, a food for thought. In this episode, we will delve into the intricacies of African life and question the narratives that have perpetuated myths and misconceptions for far too long. We will discuss how traveling and exploring open our eyes to the truths that often remain obscured by stereotypes. From education reforms to politics, cultures to daily life, we will unravel the intricacies that challenge conventional wisdom. And we will discover the role of media, how media portrays Africa, and how these narratives are skewed perceptions. We will also tackle the scourge of old stereotypes that continue to plague Africa on a global scale and explore how these ingrained misconceptions persist and hinder progress. We'll question why we are often drawn to the exotic order. Why are we so drawn to those single-sided stories and narratives that pulls people down, especially an entire continent? Why? So, we will reflect on how the concept of a single story or narrative can lead to an incomplete and distorted view of the continent. So stay with me, ladies and gentlemen, as we embark on a journey to deconstruct misconceptions and unearth the rich tapestry of African reality. There is obviously a stark contrast between popular perceptions, misconceptions, and African reality, and we will uncover that today. So let's picture this. You're a young, bright-eyed African who's always dreamt of the distant lands beyond the continent's borders. You've been fed a steady diet of tales that paints life abroad as utopian dream, free from issues and challenges. Is a narrative that you've clung to fiercely, defending it with youthful enthusiasm. You've had such kind of narratives from your youthful age. But as fate would have it, your chance to venture beyond the African horizon arrives. So you pack your bags and set off on a flight to the land unknown. The plane touches down and suddenly you're in a different world. Unfamiliar sounds, vibrant colors, beautiful people, scent of adventure envelops you. You're ready to explore, to uncover, to experience life in its purest form. You're ready to meet reality head on, raw, unfiltered, and untamed. That's often the real feeling we all get where we venture to another country or continent. But a few months later, along the line, our views about that new environment we've just encountered often changes. Why? Reality sets in. The new environment isn't paradise after all. The new environment isn't free from issues and challenges as we often thought. You know, the phrase, the grass is not greener on the other side, is a well-known saying that implies what appears better or more desirable from a distance may not actually be so when experienced up close. Whenever we travel, we find out how much more interesting reality is than our preconceptions. Our reality often surpasses our preconceptions. That reality is far more captivating than our preconceived ideas. When we arrive in a new country, we often bring with us certain expectations, certain ideas that shapes, or that is often shaped by what we have read, what we've seen in movies, or what we've heard from others. And these preconceptions can create a filter through which we view the new place we're in. When you get to a place with preconceived notions, with baggage of myths and misconceptions, or you carry with yourself a set of one-sided stories, the question is, do you miss that beauty of reality? Do these preconceptions obscure the beauty of reality? If these preconceptions are based on myths and misconceptions, they can often lead you to overlook or misinterpret the true beauty and reality of that new place. I'll give you an example. If someone arrives in Africa with preconceived notions of it being a place solely defined by safaris, tribal rituals, political instability, they might often miss out on experiencing the diverse cultures, rich histories, modern cities, and everyday life that exists alongside those aspects. And in this sense, the saying the grass is not greener on the other side obviously reminds us that preconceptions can obscure the true beauty and complexity of the world around us. Africa in particular is a continent that defies stereotypes and challenges cliches at every turn. It's a place where diversity thrives, where every corner tells a unique story. Every corner in Africa has a different story to tell. From Ojuelegba in Lagos to Mombasa in Kenya to Cairo in Egypt to Kinshasa in Republic of Congo. Lovely places, different stories and adventures. I recently had a conversation with someone embarking on his first business trip to Africa. His excitement was palpable, fueled by images he had seen in books and movies, endless savannas, tribal ceremonies, untamed wildlife roaming the streets in Africa. Undernourished children, people dwelling in huts and political turmoil. He had all that in his mind. But the truth is this the complete truth about an entire continent? Or is this a single-sided set of stories that has been portrayed to represent a whole continent? I realized that his perception of Africa was skewed by what he had seen or heard, forming the basis for his expectations as he ventured into the continent's embrace. The truth is, Africa is much more than the sum of his portrayals in books and in movies. It's a tapestry of complexity that transcends those narratives, those superficial narratives. There is more to Africa than what is depicted in books and movies. It is more complex than books, news, and movies that we're usually exposed to. And any reality that we construct of a place, even as vibrant as Africa, the Owan Bears in Africa, any reality we construct of a place is often only a fraction of the truth. It's partial. No matter how much knowledge we have, we always need to learn more. No matter how well informed we believe ourselves to be, there's always a place to learn. Even as someone with African heritage, I'm continually discovering the beauty, intricacies of this remarkable continent, learning every day. Traveling to another country opens our eyes to see familiar issues in fresh, illuminating ways, but it's often crucial that we approach this journey with open minds, ready to learn, to absorb the rich tapestry of cultures, tradition, educational reforms, politics, and ways of life that often exist across borders. And without this commitment to self-education through travel and exploration, I'm afraid the specter of old stereotypes will persistently haunt Africa on the global stage. So, to my friend embarking on his African adventure, I offered this simple advice: go and explore Africa with an open mind and a thirst for knowledge, because every corner you step into has a story waiting to be told. Don't miss out on the breathtaking beauty of reality. And that's the truth. So traveling and educating oneself opened the door to exploring nuances, similarities, and differences. Let's delve into the reality checks of media and misrepresentation, because that's actually what sometimes fuels certain narratives and portrayals. Television and movies have played their part in distorting African reality. Sometimes when we tune into the news, we focus on the wrong aspect of the narrative. Sometimes I also fall victim of that. TV often offers a narrow perspective, focusing on nature programs and disaster politics. Certain big movie giants, for his part, has never been interested in reality, especially about Black people. And that's the honest truth. The movies rarely portray reality. And that's why most films about African stars, they star white actors, like out of Africa, or focus on animals, like the Lion King. So we must ask ourselves, what truly represents this vast continent? What truly represents Africa? The reality is most Africans have never seen the wild animals that Africa is so famous for. Some of us have never seen the wild animals, the big five, for which Africa is famous. The idea of large herds of elephants, zebras is a fantasy for so many people who actually live in Africa as well. A lot of Africans don't even know much about safari or game parks with wild animals. And this is because just a few African countries have those big fives. Just a few African countries have big herds of elephants, zebras, and other animals. And I can speak for myself. My first wild animal adventure for me was when I visited Kenya on holiday as an adult. And interestingly, the portrayal of Africa in TV and movies, with a focus on safaris, zoos, nature programs, and disaster politics, often reflects the concept of the danger of a single story. The concept, which was eloquently presented by Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie in a TED Talk, which highlights the idea that reducing complex individuals, cultures, and society to a single, often negative stereotype or perception can be dangerous and misleading. In the context of TV and films, which Africa is predominantly depicted as a place of safaris, wildlife, and exotic adventures, it often perpetuates a single narrow narrative. And people who consume these portrayals may assume that this narrative represents the entirety of Africa. In essence, it creates a single story of Africa, emphasizing its wildlife and natural beauty while overlooking its diverse cultures, urban developments, economics, and the day-to-day everyday life in Africa. And the danger lies in the fact that this single story is incomplete and misleading. Africa is an incredibly diverse continent with a wide range of cultures, lifestyles, and experiences. So by fixating on safari and wildlife narrative alone, the media not only oversimplifies Africa, but they also reinforce stereotypes and misconceptions, suggesting that Africa is possibly primarily a wilderness to be explored, neglecting the rich complexities of its cities, the communities, and its people. More so, this single-sided story could lead to a distorted view of Africa, especially to those who have never visited the continent before. So when people outside Africa primarily, associate themselves, with safaris and wildlife, they might overlook other things and other contributions that Africa has got to, the global culture, science, technology, and even politics. They may even fail to recognize the urban, centers, educational institutions, and the thriving economies that exist alongside its natural wonders. So, portrayal of Africa as a safari even in TV and movies is a prime example of the danger of a single story, reducing a vast and diverse continent to a narrow one-dimensional narrative, reinforcing stereotype and misconception while obscuring the rich tapestry of African reality. It is essential that we challenge and expand these narratives to promote a more accurate and informed understanding of Africa and its people. So, speaking about Kenya, there is a surprising fact that I've just taken note of. Many people outside Africa are unaware that the Maasai and similar semi-nomadic groups are not representative of Africa as a whole. They're actually atypical of Kenya and highly atypical of the entire continent. During the colonial rule, the British spotlighted Maasai life, portraying African as uniquely different and very primitive. The motive was to present Africa as primitive. But unfortunately, this image still lingers and is reflected in the disproportionate number of Maasai photographs compared to their actual population. Most of the books we see, some portrayals of media shows, the Maasai and people as if they are the key representative of the entire continent. But it begs the question, why are we so captivated by the exotic other? Is Africa only interesting when it's different from what we know? Or is there more to what the media and the people wants to portray about Africa and the reason behind such? We should remember that in teaching or talking about Africa, our mistakes often tend to come not from using inaccurate or outdated information, but from choosing the wrong information to focus on. We focus on that wrong information. So dear listeners, what stories do you know about Africa? Is it one that informs you about a group of Africans, or one that have narrowed your views about the entire continent itself? Reflecting on the dangers of a single story, emphasizes the fact that most misconceptions and myths about Africa often find their roots in single stories, and these stories often perpetuate negative stereotypes. And portraying Africa as a continent of poverty, disease, malnourished children, conflict is single-sided, and such stereotypes are not only false but also harmful as they shape perceptions and policy decisions. Like Chimamanda did say, single stories can be malicious in intent, as they can be used as tools of power to suppress and marginalize certain groups. A typical example is portraying Africa as a continent of perpetual crisis and terrorism. Such portrayal can justify international interventions or economic exploitation. It also limits opportunities. When people are seen through a narrow lens, they are denied the chance to reach their full potential. And in the case of Africa, this manifests as reduced investment, limited educational opportunities, and sometimes biased media coverage, as all of which hinder progress and development. Breaking it down to children and what we actually teach children and young people about Africa. When we teach about Africa in schools or in public spaces or in any educational institution, we carry a special responsibility. And this is because most of the books, textbooks, and films, and even picture books are stereotyped. One question we must ask ourselves as parents or educators involved with children is is this portrayal representative? And I know there's been so much that is currently being done to change this narrative, but there is still much more that needs to be done. And kudos to all those change makers, those leaders that are, on a day-to-day basis, portraying, Africa or Black people in the right light. Those that are fighting continuously to make sure that these narratives actually truly reflects the people. So the question we must ask ourselves when we, educate children, when we teach children and young people is, what we're showcasing, is it an accurate depiction of Africa? Do we see both sides of the coin, the rich and the poor, urban and rural life, the problems and possibilities, or are we showcasing one-sided aspects of the story? And I'll tell you, what is often most showcased is the poor, rural life, the problems. But they are two sides to the coin. In short, we must learn more to question our sources. And our challenge as educators and as parents, like myself, is to replace these myths and misconceptions with reality. How do we get to see that reality? How do we get to know the reality? And where do we start from to addressing these complex issues? Whether you're traveling to Africa or reading books or watching an African film or teaching children about the continent, we must have an open mind to learn, to challenge stereotypes, to challenge single-sided narratives that can perpetuate negative perceptions and stereotypes, and to challenge long-held myths and distorted view about the continent. Those distorted view reduces the diverse cultures, histories, and experience of Africans into a monolithic narrative, often obscuring the rich tapestry of life on the continent. The burdens of centuries of exploitation and information that Africa carries is often misinterpreted. It's important to know that single stories not only reflect ignorance, but it also perpetuates it. When we accept a single narrative without questioning it, we remain in a state of ignorance about the true complexities of a place or its people. And those ignorance can lead to well-intentioned but misguided efforts to help, because we act based on incomplete information. So before we wrap up today's exploration of myths and misconceptions, and with a focus on African reality, we need to look at every narrative from the lens of a single-sided story. Dear listeners, let's take a moment to reflect in our own personal role in challenging these myths within our communities. In the context of myths and misconceptions about Africa, Chimamanda Adichie's argument highlights the importance of challenging these single, narrow-sided stories. It calls for a more nuanced and accurate portrayal of the continent and its people, either through media, TV, books. A story that recognizes the diversity, the resilience, the richness that exists alongside those challenges. And it's important that we, either as parents or educators, continue to question our own sources of information. And, when you have that opportunity to travel, across borders, especially to travel to Nigeria or to Africa, as it were, do so with an open mind to see the beauty of the reality of Africa, because every corner of Africa has got a story to tell. And by so doing, we can combat stereotypes, dispel myths, and foster a more informed and empathetic understanding of Africa and its contributions to the global world, to the global community. So, dear listeners, our challenge today for yourself and for myself, and going forward, is to replace these myths with African reality. And as we conclude this eye-opening journey into reality beyond preconceptions, unmasking myths about Africa, I want to encourage you, our lovely listeners, to reflect on what we've explored today. Africa is not a monolith. It's a continent of outstanding diversity, where each corner tells a unique story. Our hope is that you will now approach Africa with fresh eyes, unburdened by the myths and misconceptions that have persisted for far too long. And it's that time to challenge the status quo and seek a more accurate representation of the continent. I used to tell my kids, if you're not sure, ask questions. And I encourage that of everyone, including myself. When you're not sure, ask questions. Possibly not from the internet by itself, but there are every form and ways in which you can always get the right source of information. Because by educating ourselves, either through books, through travel, through asking questions, we peel back the layers of stereotypes and we challenge the narratives, every narrative that we encounter. And by so doing, we can collectively embrace a more accurate and respectful representation of Africa. Remember, the danger of a single story lies in its incompleteness. Africa is not just the safari you see on TV. It is a place of innovation, a place of culture and vibrant community. It's a place where the past and present coexist, where resilience and progress prevail. So let's continue let's continue this journey of discovery together. Let's celebrate the multifaceted reality of this extraordinary continent. So, ladies and gentlemen, join us in our next episode as we delve even deeper into the art of Africa and explore its hidden treasures. Thank you for being part of the Afrikindness podcast community. Stay curious, stay kind, and keep unmasking the myths to reveal the rich, diverse, and beautiful reality that is Africa. From me today, it is bye for now.
Thanks for tuning in to Afrikindness podcast, where we celebrate African culture and tell our stories. We hope you've learned something new and gained a deeper appreciation for the continent. Join us next time for more conversation, more stories, and more kindness. And remember, our past, present, and future are interconnected, and it's up to us to shape the narrative and create a better world for our children. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and stay proud of your roots. Africa, Emagba.